We've all been there before. You want to get someone the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, but you have no idea what to get. Well, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. Gift baskets are perfect for any occasion, whether it's birthdays, holidays, corporate events, or a simple thank you. At designeryourselfgiftbaskets.com, you get to choose the theme and the products that go into the basket. You have a coffee lover? Try the K-Cup basket. You're looking for something special for the person that loves to barbecue? No problem. There's a basket for it. Make every basket unique to the person you're sending it to. And if you're in a rush and don't have time to customize the gift basket, it's not an issue because at DIYGB.com you can choose from hundreds of pre-arranged baskets based on the occasion, theme, or recipient. And P.A.S. report listeners get 10% off using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off your order. Visit DIYGB.com today.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and buckle up. I got another informative episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast, nothing should shock you at this point. Nothing. I have been sounding the alarm bells for years now. But even if you're a new listener and you've been listening for the last month, you're getting a better picture of what exactly is going on. A month ago, I broke down the double standards and the unequal application of law, where we have two sets of rules, two sets of standards. One for one side that clearly shows there are many who are above the law in the United States. They're the ruling elite. Then there's another set of standards used to target anyone who does not submit to the ruling elite. I then did an episode laying out the abuses of power by the agencies and departments within our government. And over the course of the last 20 years, I gave specific examples of these abuses and explained how that we cannot blindly trust these agencies as corruption continues to fester. I also wrote an article that was published in the Federalist. There's this push within the administration, the media, the Democrat Party, that we cannot question or criticize the institutions within government. Even some Republicans are pushing this narrative. Now, in my article, I lay out why institutions throughout our government have forfeited our trust. It's not our fault that we have to question them. It's not our fault we have to criticize them. They did it to themselves. Then you have last week, I did an episode explaining the progression of the rhetoric and actions designed to target political opposition. I explained how we went from bitter clingers to domestic terrorists. I put the timeline together of the last 2 years where the government continues to build out the administration's national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, and it's all designed to target ordinary American citizens. We're seeing it clear as day, although some want to still deny that. And I raised a question, an important question, that as Commander-in-Chief, if the president and his administration truly believe the crap that they are putting out there, then doesn't he have a solemn oath to eliminate the threat against the republic? If they believe it, what are they doing about it? And if they don't believe it, then what's their end game? How far are they willing to take it? And then, you had the president's speech last Thursday. And I wrote another article in the Federalist pointing out that his speech was 2 years in the making. It was largely predictable. Although I didn't predict the 1930s authoritarian-style backdrop. I mean, that was something I didn't predict. Any idiot that understands politics and optics would know, hey, this looks really bad. We might not want to go with this. However, after listening to all the commentary since then, so many people out there are missing the bigger picture of Biden's speech. So many don't realize that this isn't about President Biden. It's not about President Trump. It goes so much deeper than that. And that's what I want to touch on this episode. Before I jump in, be sure to click the follow button so you never miss an episode of this podcast, share it with others, and visit the PAS Report website, PASreport.com. Now, too many people are getting caught up in the individuals rather than the darkness of what we are witnessing. It's not about President Biden or former President Trump. It's about how you have this arrogant ruling class that views half the country with disdain. And they'll view the other half of the country with disdain once the other half doesn't like what they're doing. How they subscribe the most evil intent, the most evil motives to half the country. How they dehumanize half the country. And most importantly, it's about how they are using the tools and power of the government, of the bureaucracy, to crush their political opposition. And I understand that it's always easier to put faces to these things. It reminds me of the Hunter Biden laptop story. There are so many who make it as if it's about Hunter Biden. And I'll admit, Hunter certainly has led an interesting life, and that's putting it mildly. But let's be honest, the importance of the laptop isn't about Hunter's crack addiction or sex fetishes. The important thing about the laptop is that it lays out the Biden family business, the corruption where Joe Biden used his position and power to enrich himself and his family. But since so many focus their attention on Hunter, the Democrat response is always the same. Well, Hunter Biden isn't president. And they allow Joe Biden to get a pass. Now, that would never fly if it was going the other way. Trust me on that. But even down to the current investigation that's being slow-walked, it's not that Hunter hasn't potentially committed any crimes. I mean, we know for a fact that he lied on gun applications, violating federal gun laws. There are talks that he transported prostitutes across state lines. That's federal crime. But nobody's asking the bigger question that we should be asking. Why hasn't an investigation been opened up into Joe Biden and his role in the scheme? Like, that's a far more important question than whether or not Hunter Biden's being investigated. The same thing holds true now. Everyone is pointing to President Biden as if he is the one that makes the decisions, as if he is the one that's crafting his own speeches, as if he is the one that's going out there and handling his schedule day in, day out. Remember, President Biden is nothing more than a vessel. He reads the script that's put in front of him. Are we going to pretend that a guy that shakes hands with ghosts is really all there and calling the shots? I mean, is that what we're going to pretend? Now, last Thursday, you had the president come out, rip apart nearly 50% of our country as threats to democracy, declaring that they are part of, quote, an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic, end quote. The very next day, reporter Steve Doocy asked the president directly whether Trump supporters represent a threat to America and our way of life. The president wasn't on script. He was off script now. And he responded, quote, I don't consider any Trump supporter a threat to the country, end quote. And then literally 2 days later on Sunday, the president tweeted out, MAGA proposals are a threat to the very soul of this country, end quote. He attacked a Trump supporter at one of his rallies where like 5 people showed up. Now, we all know the president doesn't craft his tweets. He's not on Twitter. So this is what his administration is putting out. He has a whole team that does all these things for him. And you can rest assured that any tweets that goes out under his account, they have to be approved at the highest levels. It's not some low-level staffer that's putting out these tweets or approving the tweets. The low-level staffer may write them, but it's being approved at the highest levels of the Biden administration. The main point I'm trying to make is that it is the entirety of the administration. The nameless, faceless bureaucrats that actually believe this stuff that Biden's putting out there. And that's what makes it so frightening. Because they are nameless. They are faceless. The press never asks who's really calling the shots. Those in some of the highest position of power are in charge of the most powerful institutions within the bureaucracy, institutions that have the capabilities to destroy people's lives and livelihoods, are turning the power of these institutions against ordinary Americans, branding them as if they're subhuman, as if they're evil, as if they want to destroy the system. And this brings me to the second point. You have to listen closely to what they are really saying. Some want to keep their heads buried in the sand, others continue to lie to themselves. Then you have those that are living in fantasy land, and I include Republicans in that. I mean, like, where is Mitch McConnell? Where is Mitch McConnell? As of this recording, his Twitter feed has gone dark. He has not said one thing about Biden's speech. He has not come out to defend his constituents and ordinary Americans from being attacked viciously. Nothing. So you have these Republicans that I include in this. Unfortunately, so many people within the United States lack the ability to think critically. There are so many who argue with me that, oh, he's not talking about all Republicans. He's only talking about MAGA Republicans. They say that anyone who accuses this administration of trying to target political opposition and label opponents as domestic terrorists are nothing more than conspiracy theorists, right? That we're the ones that are trying to push this conspiracy. The amount of times I've heard someone say, well, if you're not a fascist, why are you getting mad at what President Biden said? That's how dumb people are. It reminds me of the Patriot Act. And if you opposed it, someone would always say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't have to worry. Well, how well did that work out for us? Because I recall it didn't work out too well. So I'm not just willing to go along with something simply because. It doesn't make any sense to me. As a people, Americans are very literal. And if it doesn't come directly from someone's mouth, or if there isn't a smoking gun, many will ignore the obvious. They'll deny the obvious exists. It's like when Trump sarcastically said that Putin should release Hillary's emails. Now, anyone with a brain and common sense and a sense of humor knew that Trump was being sarcastic and he was making a joke. But it sent the media into a frenzy. The talking heads and Democrats, they went apoplectic. See, he's working with Putin. He admitted it. He stated that he's working with Putin. He's a Russian plan. He's colluding. Instead, those who support the current president will say, well, the president never said he was going to label political opponents as domestic terrorists, so you're just misconstruing what he is saying. And of course, the president isn't going to come out there. And the president isn't going to openly admit, and his administration isn't going to openly admit, hey, my administration wants to target our political opponents so that we can control the power within government. Of course he's not going to come out and admit that. He's not going to say, yeah, we're just using this domestic terrorism label to, target our political opposition so it hurts them in the elections, so that they lose credibility. He's not going to openly admit that. And of course, you're not going to find a smoking gun email from the president or anyone in his bureaucracy saying, hey, Attorney General Merrick Garland, I want you to use the FBI to target my political opponents. Because that's not the way things are done. So because President Biden and his administration haven't come out and explicitly stated their intentions, his supporters ignore the mounting evidence. And he says, oh, we're just talking about MAGA Republicans. You want a better example? Here's a better example. The administration and the FBI continue to say that violent threats against the FBI have increased exponentially. You had the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, come out and state that those questioning the professionalism and integrity of the FBI are what's behind the increase in these violent threats. So just because they say violent threats are increasing, there are so many people who just run with that. They believe it. But here's the thing. We have tons of criminal statutes making it illegal to threaten federal officials. We are talking about the most capable and powerful law enforcement agency on the face of the planet. When we bring in the other law enforcement and intelligence agencies, they monitor everything. It's not like you need to do, someone threatens the FBI in a social media post, it's not like you need to do this major investigation. You need to friggin' click print, go to the person's home because you already have the IP addresses and everything, and arrest that person. If anyone is making threats, they see the post. They know the names. They know the computers being used. They know the residential addresses. If someone calls in with a violent threat, they know the cell phone numbers that are being used, the cell phone tower that's used. They could geotrack the location. They know who the phone is registered to and where the phone was purchased. Knowing this, and I know it's hard for a lot of people out there, but again, let's use our brains. Knowing that the government has all these capabilities, if there are all these violent threats against the FBI, why haven't they arrested those making the violent threats? And that's a serious question I posed to a friend of mine. He's on the opposite side of the political aisle. Yes, I do get along with liberals. I could be friends with liberals. And the reason I could be friends with them is because I don't judge them because of their political beliefs. I don't think that their political beliefs define the essence of who they are as a person. With that being said, they said that the FBI couldn't arrest anyone because they were being overwhelmed by millions of Trump supporters making these threats. And I said, where's the data to support that? You just said millions of Trump supporters are making these threats. Millions. I responded to him saying, so you're telling me with the nearly 8,000 special agents and a support staff of nearly 11,000, as well as nearly 15,000 contractors, you're telling me that they don't have the resources or capabilities to just make some arrests, make a handful of arrests, out of millions of threats coming in? Is that what you're really going with? You're telling me that the FBI can't pick up a phone call to a local PD because there are state and local laws against threatening federal official, any official, government official. You're telling me that they can't pick up the phone and say, hey, do me a favor, go arrest this guy. Here's the evidence that they threatened the FBI. Please arrest him and charge him. You're telling me that they don't have that capability? And of course, they have no real response because when you use logic and reason, how would he be able to respond? I mean, if there were all these threats coming in, the best way to put an end of these threats is to purple work a bunch of the people making the threats. Wouldn't that serve as the greatest deterrent to anyone else thinking about making threats against the FBI? Well, I better not do that because I'm going to get arrested and end up going to jail for it. If you're dumb enough to make violent threats against anyone, including federal officials, you should be arrested and thrown in prison. But just because the government's coming out there and saying that there's threats happening, it doesn't necessarily make it true. Remember when there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? How did that one work out for us? Remember when North Korea was decades away from building a nuclear bomb? Remember when they were light years away from building an intercontinental ballistic missile? How did that work out for us? We make it like as if the government has been totally on the up and up time and time again, and they never lied to us, ever lied to us. I mean, come on now. Now, I have no doubt that some unstable morons were making violent threats against the FBI. I have no doubt about that, that's unacceptable. However, I do doubt what the administration officials say, especially given the lack of arrests and the lack of data behind it. But it goes deeper than that. If they really cared about threats against public officials, why would Illinois make threatening officials a non-detainable offense through the Safety Act? I don't know if you're aware, but they're passing a law called the Safety Act where it makes a whole bunch of things non-detainable offenses. And we're talking about violent crimes. We're talking about second-degree murder, robbery, car theft, all that stuff. But you have Illinois at a time where we're being told there's all these heightened threats against public officials, and we're seeing the threats increase and they're becoming more dangerous. So at the same time we're seeing all these threats increase, you have a major blue state in Illinois saying, hey, if you threaten a public official, it's a non-detainable offense. We'll give you a citation to appear in court and you'll just pay a fine. It's like when they scream about gun violence. They're constantly screaming about gun violence. We need to pass gun control laws, blah, blah, blah. These are the same people that don't enforce the gun laws that are already on the books, where they don't even bring charges against those who are arrested for illegally possessing a firearm. They don't care. That's obvious. And it's all politics. And it's important to pay attention to the words and how the president is stating those words and his administration are crafting the words. But you also have to take the rhetoric and match it up to the actions of the administration, to the policies of the administration. And that's exactly what I have done over the course of the last several years. I explained the entire timeline over the last 2 years behind the evolution, the build-out of the national strategy. And I've provided irrefutable evidence of how they continue to build out this strategy. Now, you could ignore the evidence all you want. But just because someone chooses to ignore it, it doesn't make the evidence any less damning or frightening. It doesn't change the fact that something very dark and sinister is going on. And for those that simply chalk these statements up, it's just midterm campaign rhetoric, and I heard a lot of this, especially from the Republican side. No, this goes far beyond campaign rhetoric. It goes well beyond that. This inflammatory rhetoric is by design, and if you listen closely, you can begin to realize that it's not about Trump either. Has nothing to do with Trump. Sure, he's the face that they want to attach to it, but it goes far beyond the former president. Notice how President Biden, his administration, and those in the media, they start off using the phrase MAGA Republicans, right? What does a MAGA Republican actually mean? And what about a MAGA independent? They're not included in this MAGA Republican thing? What about a MAGA libertarian or a MAGA conservative? Or what about a MAGA disaffected Democrat? Right? What about those MAGAs? Because it's not like all the MAGA people are Republicans. In fact, it's not like every single person that supported President Trump was like this, hardcore right-wing ideologue. I mean, President Trump himself was not an ideologue. He was not. You want to look at someone like Vice President Mike Pence. Vice President Mike Pence is a conservative through and through. He is not going to sit there and compromise on certain beliefs because those are his core principles. Where President Trump, he didn't have those core convictions. To President Trump, everything was negotiable. So when the Democrats claim that they're talking about MAGA Republicans, what they're really just talking about is Trump supporters. Let's be honest about it. It goes far beyond this idea of just MAGA Republicans. Consider that 74 million Americans supported the former president in the last election. We do not have 74 million MAGA Republicans out there. They weren't all Republicans, period. Not everyone that votes in an election and votes for someone belongs to that same political party. Millions of independents, libertarians, non-affiliated voters supported former President Trump. And when we talk about libertarians, don't forget that the former CIA director compared libertarians to white supremacists and domestic terrorists. So keep that in mind, too. But you even have some disaffected Democrats that supported the former president. So they intentionally start with the phrase MAGA Republicans because they want to appear as if they're not attacking 50% of the country. They want to appear as if they're not targeting all Republicans. And they're going to pepper MAGA Republicans in here and there in the speech. But that's only to provide them cover. It gives them an escape hatch. Well, we never said we're targeting all Republicans, just MAGA Republicans. However, it's really about anyone who supported the former president, anyone who disagrees with the Democrat narrative, with the far-left agenda. That's what it really comes down to. It doesn't matter how they registered to vote. So we've established Biden doesn't write his own speeches. We all know that. We all get that. Understand that people that work in government, they're wordsmiths. Every word is carefully crafted and every sentence is designed to invoke a reaction of some type. It is not by accident that they switch from MAGA Republicans and then in mid-speech, all of a sudden it goes from MAGA Republicans to Trump and his supporters. See how they do that? It's a rhetorical tactic that they use. It's by design. So they'll start off saying MAGA Republicans, but then they drop that in the middle of the speech and start talking about Trump and his supporters. When he's on the campaign trail, it's about Trump and his supporters. And again, he'll pepper in MAGA Republicans here and there, but it's about the broader part. To them, you're the one that represents the danger. You're the real threat to democracy. You're the real domestic terrorist. You're the real semi-fascist. And anyone who disagrees with their narrow-minded point of view represents this existential threat that they're talking about. And how could I say that? Easy. Just look at their words, listen to their words, and then look at their policies. If we look at President Biden's speech Thursday night, crafted by the nameless, faceless bureaucrats and approved by people like Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, he brought policies into the speech. You know, nobody's talking about that. They're talking about that President Trump is attacking MAGA Republicans, and some Republicans are saying that's 50% of the country are attacking blah, blah, blah. But just think about it. If it was really about MAGA Republicans and this threat to democracy, why is he bringing policies into this speech? Just to give you one example, just look at abortion. Why did he bring up abortion in his speech? So it's not just about Trump. It's also about policy. And I find it amazing. You know, ever since Roe versus Wade, it has always been well established that you had two sides of an issue. You had pro-life and pro-choice. Well established. As a matter of fact, the Republican platform was pro-life. Can't dispute that. It's been that way for the last, 60 years, 70 years, 50 years, whatever it is. So when he says they want to take away your right to choose, well, it's not just limited to MAGA Republicans now, is it? Because there is a huge swath of the country that's pro-life, that are Republican, that are conservative, some independents. So when he brings in policy, it proves that it has nothing to do with this idea of MAGA Republicans, that it's the Republican Party as a whole, that it's anyone that disagrees with them. And I get that the majority of Americans, they want abortion to be legal with strict rules in place. And regardless of where you stand on the issue, I mean, just think, when did we begin classifying those that are pro-life as threats to democracy, as existential threats to the republic? When did we look at pro-lifers as being fascist? It's actually bizarre when you look at it from that perspective. And now we're going to normalize, or they're going to normalize, not me, I don't normalize it, but they're going to normalize abortion anytime, anywhere, including up to the 9th month of pregnancy, like it is here in New York State. In some cases, you have people like the former governor of Virginia who advocated for post-birth abortion. We'll just keep the baby comfortable, he said, till we decide what to do. That's going to be normalized? That's not radical? I mean, come on now. And it's not just about abortion. He said that Republicans don't want you to marry the person you love. Actually, that's wrong. I don't think there's any serious Republicans talking about anything that has to do with marriage. I think most Republicans don't give a crap about who you marry and who you love. Yeah, there's some fringe that do. But for the most part, people say, you do what you want, you live the happiest life you can, just leave me alone, right? I mean, that's how we look at it. He stated that Republicans want to end contraception. Again, no serious Republican has called for an end of birth control. So the president and his administration went out there knowingly pushing lies in an effort to brand anyone who opposes the Democrat agenda as a domestic enemy and as a threat to democracy. He's not just saying MAGA Republicans. When he talks about policy, he's lumping in a whole hell of a lot of people. And just think back to the coronavirus, because it started before Biden. Think back to the coronavirus, where anyone who questioned mandates was routinely attacked. They were accused of wanting people to die. Where you had over 1,200 public health officials declare any person protesting these unconstitutional mandates are pushing white nationalist and white supremacist ideology. Then you factor in the national strategy, which claims that anyone who dissents from the narrative questions the response and the science of the pandemic, they may be inciting domestic violent extremism. Or what about Pillar 4 of the national strategy, stating that the only way to combat domestic terrorism over the long term is to implement strict gun control, to infect our schools with CRT and DEI programs, institute this idea of equity throughout all aspects of society. These are policies. These are policies. And what this administration is saying is that if you would disagree with us on these policies, you can be branded a domestic terrorist. What about when some on the left and within the Democrat Party call to criminalize anyone who questions and raises doubts about climate change? Those who are opposed to the Democrats' radical climate agenda. They're routinely targeted as climate deniers that want people to die. And listen, I believe climate change is real. How much of it is from human beings? How much of it is from natural Mother Nature? I can't answer that question. Do I want to live on a cleaner planet? Yeah, I do. Do I want to be able to go on the hiking trails and not see litter all over the place? Yeah. Do I want to drink clean water and breathe in clean air? Yeah, I think most Americans do, regardless of whatever political party that they belong to. But just because I disagree with this rush towards electric vehicles, where we're not ready for that, where the electric vehicle technology is not ready for that, where our grids aren't ready for that, well, then I hate the climate and I want people to die. I'm denying the climate. What about those opposed to the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which does nothing to lower inflation? Well, according to this administration, they're all MAGA Republicans, right? MAGA Republicans voted against the Inflation Act. That's what he's saying. Now, the vast majority of Republicans voted against the Inflation Reduction Act. I think pretty much all Republicans voted against that Inflation Act. I'd have to double check that. But President Biden said MAGA Republicans voted against it. They rejected it. So what does that tell you? I mean, most of the issues I just mentioned, there were always multiple sides to. You always had, Republicans and Democrats jockeying over these issues. But now you have one side accusing the other side of being a threat to democracy when they don't support the Democrat policies in the media. They're going to happily push this narrative to demonize so many people in our country. Like, do you think the country is in a better position today from Biden's speech? Do you think it helped in any way, or do you think it made things worse? See, you get accused of undermining our institutions whenever you question or criticize them. When you point out specific examples of abuses of power, you're accused of undermining the trust within our institutions. Are you kidding me? I mean, you're doing it to yourself. And when you point that out to them, they'll say, well, no, it's not really about the policies. You're exaggerating things. We're talking about the MAGA Republicans that question the integrity of the elections in January 6th. See, you're not allowed to ask questions about Zuckerberg injecting $400 million essentially to take over local election operations, which if I was Democrats, I would actually be really concerned about that, because what happens if Republican billionaires get involved and do the same thing? They're not going to like it very much. See, I don't want either party to do these things. Democrats just don't want Republicans to do these things. You're not allowed to ask questions as to why big tech, the media, and 51 or 52 former senior level intelligence and law enforcement officials declared and censored any talk about the Biden laptop as Russian disinformation, even though they all knew damn well it wasn't Russian disinformation. They knew they were lying, and yet they still pushed it anyway. Well, how much did that influence the election? I mean, in normal times, that would have destroyed a person's candidacy. Don't care who they are, Republican or Democrat. You go back 30, 40 years ago, a story like that comes out, that person is not surviving that election. But we're not allowed to ask questions. And now we learn that the FBI, yes, the same FBI that has been politically weaponized for years, went to Facebook to push them to censor posts involving the Biden laptop. And you could bet that if they went to Facebook, they went to every other social media company. But you're not allowed to question that. It's funny how these frauds now care about the integrity of elections. It's funny that now they say you can't question the election. They have short memories. They seem to forget that they challenged the 2000 election. But let's just say I cut them some slack with that one. I mean, that one went to the Supreme Court. There was a lot of controversy, so I'll cut them some slack. But why did they challenge the 2004 election even though George W. Bush handily beat John Kerry, a.k.a. Lurch? They forget that Trump had a decisive electoral victory in 2016. Yes, he did lose to popular vote, but he did win by a large margin in the Electoral College, yet Democrats challenged that election as well. For God's sakes, Hillary still doesn't accept the results of that election. She was blaming everything and everyone for a loss, even Macedonian content farmers. The same Hillary Clinton that said that Biden should not concede the 2020 elections under any circumstance. Then in 2020, you also had the Transition Integrity Project. They claim to be nonpartisan, but the Transition Integrity Project consisted of Democrats and never Trumpers, financed by Soros groups. And I mean, who actually runs election simulation war games out there? Who does that? And they did. They ran 4 scenarios. They have short memories, these people. They forget that they're the ones who started the Not My President hashtag campaign when President Trump was inaugurated. They are the ones who constantly question the legitimacy of the 2016 elections, and they unleashed the full power and authority of the bureaucracy to target an elected president. But that can be ignored. They ignore that. What about Stacey Abrams refusing to accept the Georgia gubernatorial election of 2018? I mean, my goodness. These are the same people that have questioned the legitimacy of the 2022 midterm elections that haven't even happened yet. They're already questioning the results of an election that hasn't taken place. In January of this year, President Biden was asked if he believed that 2020 elections would be fairly conducted and if the results would be legitimate. And he said, quote, "I'm not saying it's going to be legit. The increase in the prospect of it being illegitimate is in direct proportion to us not being able to get these reforms passed," end quote. And he was talking about an election act that was being debated in Congress, and it didn't pass. So are you now saying that you're going to question the legitimacy of the 2022 elections? Well, you'll question it if Republicans win. But if Democrats win, I could guarantee you won't question it. You had the House Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer, so we're not talking about some backbencher here. We're talking about someone pretty high up in the food chain on the Democrat side who agreed with President Biden when asked whether he supported the integrity of the election that hasn't happened yet in 2022. You had Senator Chris Murphy saying that he worries that changes to Georgia's voter laws, which they routinely lied about, they lied to the American people about what those changes consist of, will quote, ultimately result in the loser being declared the winner, end quote. You had John Conyers also question whether or not 2022 is going to be legitimate. You have Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Besson warning that Republicans are going to commit violence and disrupt the election without providing any evidence whatsoever. You have Congressman James Clyburn also said that he is concerned about the midterm elections and it won't be legitimate unless the federal government takes election operations out of the state hands. So they could question the elections all you want. You're not allowed to question the 2020 elections because you're a MAGA Republican then. If we look at January 6th, because it seems they keep pushing January 6th as part of their political violence narrative. Now, first of all, nearly every Republican and conservative I know condemned the riot at the Capitol. Every Republican and conservative I know called for anyone who broke laws to be prosecuted. Now, where we disagree is we don't believe it's an insurrection, like they keep pushing. We believe that it was a riot and that those that committed crimes deserve to be punished for them. We also question the treatment of those arrested that are in solitary confinement, have been in solitary confinement for well over a year, that remain in solitary confinement until their trial. Both a violation of the right to a quick and speedy trial as well as a ban on cruel and unusual punishment. But yet, so that's what we dispute about January 6th. We don't support January 6th. We didn't condone January 6th. We didn't say that January 6th was okay. But we put it into perspective because perspective is important. But more to the point, January 6th was a riot that lasted a few hours. And out of the millions plus people that attended the protest, there was a few hundred people that went into the Capitol, that stormed the Capitol, that rioted in the Capitol. And they keep using this to say that those who voted for the former president are politically violent. But name me an incident since January 6th. I mean, not for nothing, you had cities around the United States that are currently becoming unlivable because of all the crime. Random assaults, looting, car thefts, rapes, murders, homeless camps all over the place. We have Americans, ordinary Americans, who did nothing wrong, who have to live like prisoners in their own homes because they're afraid to walk the streets. But they want to ignore all that for this idea of political violence. It's not to say political violence can happen, but these are the same people that didn't care when police stations were being burned down, when businesses were being destroyed, ultimately destroying the livelihoods of the employees and the business owners, when statues and monuments were being desecrated, when federal buildings were being attacked. That was all okay because those were just fiery but peaceful protests. I mean, it goes far beyond hypocrisy and it gets frustrating. So it's not to say that political violence cannot occur. It certainly can. All you need is a few unstable individuals and all hell could break loose. But the idea that we've seen this repeated amount of political violence since January 6th is a lie. It's a myth. January 6th was a one-time event. No incident since. And yet they keep pushing us that the right is politically violent. It's amazing. But many within the power structure, they want violence. And I don't say that lightly. You're accusing them of these bad motives. No, I don't say it lightly. But just look at all this talk of civil war. While you have some people posting this nonsense of civil war, the basement dwellers, it really is the media driving the narrative. Just do a quick Google search of civil war, and you're going to see headline after headline about crazy people on the right-wingers fomenting civil war. Now, all this talk of civil war is nonsense, and sometimes you need to turn off the news because they are so out of touch with reality. First off, it's not like we're seeing roving mobs of Democrats and Republicans battling in the streets. You don't see roving mobs of Democrats and Republicans beating the hell out of each other at the grocery stores or at the shopping malls. I mean, we actually coexist well together when you look at it. We shop at the same grocery stores, we shop at the same shopping centers, we attend the same schools, our children attend the same schools, we live in the same neighborhoods, and we generally get along with each other. So the reality doesn't necessarily match what they're putting out there. But that doesn't matter because sometimes you could create that self-fulfilling prophecy. But my second point, and this is no offense to the younger generations, you're going to hate me after I say this, but no offense to the younger generations, and I include the older generations as well, with the exception of those from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But do you believe that the current generations have the grit to fight a civil war? I mean, do you really believe that, people with man buns and skinny jeans are ready for the battlefield? They're going to be in the foxholes. I mean, all you have to do is cut off internet access. How many would go into full meltdown mode? And the reason that people like myself, conservatives, people on the right, I guess you want to call them MAGA Republicans, the reason we don't want civil war is because we know where it goes. We know we all lose. Our way of life is forever changed. We know that once we go down that road, there is no return. It's not like this is going to be a 2-week engagement and everything goes back to normal. We know that if civil war breaks out, everything that we take for granted today, every luxury we have, like dining out and air conditioning, electricity, clean water, we know it's all out the window. It's all gone. So no, we don't want to see civil war. And talk of civil war is completely irresponsible for anyone, but especially within the media. Every community, every block is filled with Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and progressives, libertarians and independents. It's not like the 1860 where we have this north-south divide. Are we really going to engage in urban warfare on every block going house to house? Are we going to engage in hand-to-hand combat with our neighbors who we've hung out with, shared a beer with, raised families together, socialized with? Have they thought about what real civil war actually means? And are you prepared for the entire civil society to collapse if civil war breaks out? But they want to push this narrative. They want to push it. Why? Because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The power the government continues to usurp from the people and wield that power against their political opposition, the closer we inch to conflict. It happens time and time again. Just look at the history of any nation. Whenever you have a government that targets political opposition, uses the power and authority of the state to target their opposition, it ends badly for everyone, not just those being targeted. Ends badly for everyone. And I warned about this in an episode I did following the January 6th riots, because I saw it then, and I saw what was happening. Take a listen to what I had to say then. Other option is to continue to do what we're doing. It's to continue to go down this dark path that got us to this point in the first place. And I'll guarantee you that in the end, we're all going to lose. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is. Because if we continue down the path we're currently on, it doesn't matter if you're a progressive. It doesn't matter if you're conservative. We're all screwed. So I want to focus on the dark path really quickly first. Because it appears that's what the elites have decided that they're going to choose. It's what the media wants. It's what the political class wants. Many from the Democrat and Republican establishments want that. That's clear. So what do I mean by that? Just look at what happened last Wednesday at the Capitol building and look at the response since then. The elites savage the president, but more importantly, they begin to savage his supporters. They're trying to brand 75 million people with a scarlet letter. And in some cases, they're actually looking to hurt the lives and livelihoods of the Trump supporters. Do you think that's going to end well? And never once did they acknowledge the hundreds of thousands that peacefully protested. President-elect Biden used the term domestic enemies, and since then, others have been following suit. We've heard calls, and I'm not kidding. I mean, you look at the ABC political news director. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he calls for a cleansing in our society, a cleansing. There are many calling for a purge of the America First ideology. Well, how do you purge the ideology? And they're moving with lightning speed to redefine what dissent is. They want to classify anyone who dissents as domestic terrorists. But they're playing a dangerous game, and they're too dumb to see what's right in front of them. They need to just stop immediately because we're facing a dark future, and the future isn't that far ahead. It's not like it's 5 or 10 years down the road. The future's a couple months down the road. It's right around the corner. You know, understand that before I started teaching full-time, I come from a Homeland Security background, emergency management background. I've studied terrorism extensively. I've given dozens of lectures on terrorism. If you wanted to write a guidebook on how terrorist organizations form, what creates extremists, how to radicalize people, you would do exactly what's being done now. It would be like the playbook that you go to. That's the scary part. These morons are creating the next Timothy McVeigh. Now, that was a year and a half ago. Whether these fools know it or not, they are creating the next Timothy McVeigh, and some want that to happen because then they use that as justification to target their political opponents. They'll scream, "See, we told you. We told you that they are violent, that they want to destroy America and our way of life. And all it takes is one fool to do something very stupid and everything changes. Everything changes. And we have to be smarter than that." They know that there are a lot of very unstable people out there on all sides of the issue, and yet they keep pushing. That's what frightens me. And I could hear people on the left now say, but, you know, Republicans engage in the same tactics. They use words like socialist, communist, and Marxist when they're talking about their political opponents. And yeah, that's true. But there are some differences. First off, you don't hear Republicans use words like purge, deprogram, re-educate, eradicate when they're talking about political opposition. And for the handful that are, they're probably fringe Republican players. We also don't declare that anyone that supported President Biden as an enemy of the state. We don't do that. We don't call those who voted for President Biden domestic terrorists. I haven't heard a single Republican member of Congress, call the Democrats the enemy from within, domestic enemies. They'll scream, but Trump called Democrats fascist. And my response to that is, what's your point? I mean, first off, you don't justify bad behavior by pointing out other bad behavior. My grandmother taught me that when I was a kid. So just because Trump did it doesn't mean that Biden has to do it. Secondly, it's not about being called a fascist. I mean, Democrats have labeled millions of Americans racist, xenophobic, bigots, misogynists, and fascists for years. That's not really a change. What people like me are upset about is the fact that the former president, he didn't embark on a campaign to target ordinary Americans. He didn't label ordinary Americans as domestic terrorists. Sure, he called the media the enemy of the people, and I didn't like that, and I stated I didn't like that. But more importantly, he didn't unleash the highest and most powerful institutions within our government to target political opponents. He didn't do that, and that's what's being done now. I mean, listen, you have Democrats in office now that openly state they're socialists, that they're avowed socialists. They openly push socialist and Marxist policies. And take people like Senator Sanders or Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They routinely spout socialist Marxist philosophies and policies. I have never heard a Republican or conservative say that they should be labeled as domestic enemies. Certainly no Republican in any position of power. No one has said that they should be removed from office. No one has said that they can't believe in socialist policies, that they're not allowed to believe what they want. I haven't heard that. See, we understand it's called freedom of thought. We may point out the destructive nature of Marxist and socialist policies, but we understand that people have a right to believe in whatever they want. And again, it doesn't mean that there aren't Republicans that put out rhetoric that they shouldn't. But there's only one side that uses words like purge and re-educate, deprogram, eradicate when they talk about political opposition, and that's the difference. Don't take the bait. You have to be smart. It's not about Biden or Trump, it's about you. Unfortunately, the former president, he continues to take the bait and plays right into the Democrats' hand. This is where the former president falls for it every time. Listen, I understand that he's bitter and angry. I would be too if what happened to him happened to me. I would be miserable. I don't know a single person that would be able to weather the relentless attacks from investigation to investigation, two impeachments, nonstop leaking of false information. Anyone else would have had a meltdown by now. No, I don't know a single person that would have been able to withstand this assault. But why play their game? Why do what they want? And what do I mean by that? You have the former president constantly bringing up things he shouldn't. He constantly says things that Democrats want him to say. Like, why even talk about the 2020 elections? Leave that to your underlings. Take last week when the former president stated that we should hold new elections and he should be reinstated as president. Why even say that? Why go down that road? It's not like that's realistic. It's not like that's actually going to happen. And if he does plan on running in 2024, do you think statements like that are going to draw in any new voters? His base is already with him, so there's no point to make statements like this because no one who is on the fence is going to say, well, now I'm going to support him. He said he should be reinstated. He said that we should hold a new election. Now I'm going to support him. Instead, they're just going to stay home because they don't like the current president either. Listen, I'm on record with my thoughts about the 2020 elections and all the BS that took place. But statements like that don't help, and you're just giving the Democrats what they want. You're giving them ammunition. When he gave the rally the other day, why even call President Biden an enemy of the state? I mean, first of all, Biden is a puppet. We know that. He doesn't make the decisions. But why go down that road? Let your other people do that. And President Biden and his administration, they've revealed themselves for who they are. The media was actually covering Biden's speech. So why did you give the media an excuse to change the news cycle? Instead of covering Biden's horrible authoritarian-style speech, why did you allow them to change the news cycle? And it was about that. It doesn't make any sense. Why do that? Listen, the Biden administration is a disaster on every front, whether it's the economy, inflation, energy, the supply chain, education, international affairs, everything. You name it, they've screwed it up somehow. And that should be the story. Don't take attention away from the failures because the talking heads are looking for any excuse not to cover these failures. Don't give them what they want. Just remind people what the economy and gas prices were like when you were president. Remind people of the stability within the international community. Remind people of the opportunity zones. Remind them that they had good paying jobs, that the median income shot up without being eaten away by inflation. That's what people have a hunger for. They want optimism. And that's what will draw new voters in. Let all the other people talk about the grievances. Trump's name shouldn't even be in the midterm elections. There are so many things going on throughout the country that there's more than enough to talk about. Listen, President Biden's speech, it was dark, it was gloomy, it was filled with contradictions. The speech was not intended to unite Americans, nor was it meant to win over any new voters either. And while President Biden stated that he will not let anything tear us apart, that's exactly what the speech was intended to do. They want to instill fear, they want to target their political opposition. I'm warning every American out there, don't take the bait. It's why it's important not to lose sight of the bigger picture. It's why it's important to remember that this isn't about President Biden or former President Trump. It's about every single American. You know, I harp on the national strategy and the threat that it poses to us. And I have been calling out the abuses of power for several years. We have to be aware of what's going on. And you have to look at the totality of the situation. Now, as we head into the 21st anniversary of 9/11, we have to remember who we are as Americans. And we have to remember that we still live in the greatest country in the world. For all our faults, for all our problems, we have to remember that it's we the people that make this country great, not the government. As for 9/11, I'm going to have a very special episode with some great guests. It was a day that scarred this nation. And while we saw the worst in humanity when a bunch of Islamic radicals from Al-Qaeda used our planes as weapons of mass destruction against us, murdering thousands of innocent Americans, it was also a day where we saw the best of humanity. We saw the best of America, and we saw the best of Americans. And I think that we need to remember that at this point in time in our history. I think it's, as we draw closer to this 21st anniversary, I think that we need to recognize what we're capable of. Now, make sure to tune in on 9/11, very special episode. You won't want to miss it. And I hope you found the content of this episode informative. We need to get people to realize what's going on here. Don't forget, give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Take 30 seconds to write a review. It's appreciated. You don't know how much I appreciate it because you're what makes this podcast successful. Not me. It's you that makes it successful. Because of all you who routinely share this podcast with your family and your friends and people that you know, and I am gracious for that. So I want to thank you for joining me. I will be back on 9/11 with a special episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast, so make sure that you tune in.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast. so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.